We have a very good friend here today, Sister Veronica Brand. And I'm going to put the personal note first. I first met a student in a country called Rhodesia approximately 50 years ago. We both look very young, and we have survived this time. This is my relationship with Veronica. I taught her. So now she's Sister Veronica, and then she has a nickname that I won't share with you. But anyway, thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure to, start this little chit-chat with you and to introduce my dear friend, my colleague, my person who joined our community because she saw something in the RSHM in this older colony at the time called Rhodesia, now known as Zimbabwe. Many of you do not realize that to this day, I still carry a key fob of Zimbabwe. I don't think I brought my heart home when I came home, but it's lovely to have Veronica here to keep my heart going. And you will understand the joy that she brings to our community. As a person born in the UK, I guess I have to say it the British way, the UK, okay? Brought up in Rhodesia, went to our school in Umtali. Now it has a new name because they changed the names to the African names. It's Mutari. It was also a Marymount College of the British system high school system. I was a Latin teacher in those days, and that was our great affinity. She's also a great photographer. I hate to tell you who taught her. Okay. But that's the light side of Veronica. She joined our community in the mid-60s, and actually in the first years of formation, she spent part of her novitiate in this neighborhood at St. John's School in McLean. So she's not a newcomer to here. And when she occasionally gets back in the United States, she does come down here. And right now, the important thing to know about Veronica and the aspect she's going to speak of today is her ministry. She is involved, she is our RSHM representative as an NGO, non-governmental organization, to the UN. And the little caption that was written on the paper about today's talk, I think, puts it together very well. I'll read it for you just in case you missed it. Our keynote speaker is Sister Veronica Brand, non-governmental organization representative to the United Nations, will discuss historical perspectives of the Order's service outreach and how that continues today through her work and that of others. So with not much else ado to say, Veronica and myself represent ends of a spectrum of our community where we all underwent the great changes in ministry and outlook in the ministry of the Church because of Vatican II. My pleasure, Veronica.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this lovely warm welcome. I'm very honored to be here, a little intimidated, but to help me, I always like to have images. And so we are going to journey a little bit together in the words that I'm going to share with you today. And as Sister Jackie has just said, it is focusing on the outreach, the historical aspect of our service and outreach as religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary. I've put on this first slide some words from Pope Francis. He wrote to the members of the consecrated life, all the different religious orders around the world in November. And he encouraged us all, as women and men religious, to look to the past with gratitude, to remember our heritage, to live the present with passion, and to embrace the future with hope. So it is in that context that I'm going to share with you today something about the RSHM and our heritage. And I know Father Jack already stole my thunder on this, but I'm very happy he did with those who were able to come to Mass. To go back to our origins is really to go back to the south of France in 1849, where Father Jean Gaillac, shown in the image there, grew up in the house adjoining St. Aphrodite's. And that's a church that goes back to the 2nd century. So he grew up in the shelter of loving parents, of a parish priest, Father Martin, who was very supportive. And naturally he felt drawn and encouraged to the priesthood. And what he said himself, and I quote his words, he said, as he wrote years later to the sisters, "From the tender years of my youth, God filled me with a sacred fire." And that sacred fire led him to dedicate his life as a priest and not to follow actually the academic route. Instead, he went as chaplain to fill in for the existing chaplain at the Hotel Dieu, which was really the hospital, the public hospital in the south of France. I apologize, those words are not Father Gaiac's. They come from the postcard, but I wanted to show you the image. It was there that he encountered people in great poverty, and he was especially, his heart was moved to respond to the young women who had been caught up in prostitution, probably some of them trafficked, and who were sick in hospital. And I will say what Sister Gabriel, I think, may have said last year. If you have seen Les Miserables, you have a sense of the sort of poverty we're talking about, because he and Father Gaiac and Victor Hugo were actually born the same year. So the situation led him, first of all, to support young women in the refuge in Montpellier, and later, after one of the women came and dumped a baby on the door and ran, and he started a little orphanage, he needed a group of women to help with his works. That was a good number of years later, and we sometimes forget how much later it was. But if we go then to the town of Béziers, he later, in founding us on the 24th of February, 1849, Apollonie Pellissier, the widow of a dear childhood friend, who together with some of the young women for whom he was spiritual director in Béziers, formed the first community. And of course, the Mother House, and I know a few of you have been able to go there. This was the original Mother House, which began to house the early works of the congregation. The orphanage, the refuge had to be transformed, but then we had the preservation, a boarding school, because the young women who came as the first community came from very different backgrounds. One of them was a teacher, and it was she who actually became Mère Sainte-Croix and opened the boarding school. One of the sisters there, her ministry in the early days was taking a cart around the streets of Béziers with medicines to attend to the needs of the poor. And so we see that one word that ties all of this historical beginnings together really comes from Father Gaiac's quote of John 10:10. What he wanted was to know God and to make God known, to love God and to make God loved, so that, from John 10, when Jesus said, so that all may have life. And that has been the core of our mission and our core as religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary. So what I would like to do today is to take us on a little journey into the years beyond there, and before we leave Father Gaiac, I think it's important to remember that Father Gaiac was doing the works, his initial works, 60 years before there was one encyclical or Catholic social teaching. The first social encyclical was in 1890. So we're talking about 60 years before this. the response to the poor and marginalized, and that prophetic call that was represented in so many different charisms by religious who were founded at that time, and that prophetic move came and probably was part of that thrust that led into the encyclicals, into Catholic social thought, and up to today, where today we are delighted to share that heritage with our extended family, with faculty, with all those who journey with us with a shared passion so that all may have life. Internationality has been a core gift for us since our origins. And this just shows a little bit the spread over the years. And I think it's interesting to note that within a period of about 7 years in the 1870s, we had foundations in England, in Ireland, in Portugal, in the United States in 1877. And that was, at that time, the desire, the goal was to have every community made up of sisters of all the nationalities of the Institute. And that treasure of our diversity has continued to be an important part of our story. As you will see, we have moved some of the countries we've had to move out of, the ones are shown in red. But as we move down through Europe, through Latin America, Brazil, later Mexico and Colombia, Africa, with Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Mali, but unfortunately we're no longer there. What about our outreach? And I want to tell you one story, because Father Gayak believed that wherever our foundations were, the cross was present. There was an element of Paschal mystery in almost every one of our foundations. And I just want to share one word about Brazil, because I think it captures that. In 1910, there was a revolution in Portugal. There was a turn against the Catholic Church. And the religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary, who were numerous there, were being sent home to their families. They could no longer remain in the community. Some of them went to Spain. A few of them were sent here across the ocean to the United States. And then some of the sisters came forward, and one said, I feel I'm being drawn to, can't we go to Brazil? Can't we start a new foundation? Within 3 weeks of the permission, the council accepting that, they were in Brazil. And you'll see in a minute the sort of outreach and service that today keeps our Brazilian province supporting 5 schools and numerous ministries inserted among the poor and the marginalized. So now I just want to say one word about Mother Butler and her educational vision, because we do have a network of schools. And we know that it was Mother Butler, and Mother Gerard was with her in the early days in Marymount and Tarrytown. But her holistic vision of education, something that provided for each student's total growth. It wasn't separated into segments, it was holistic. It was intellectual, it was spiritual, social, and physical. And that is part of our RSHM heritage. Today, we're not in all these schools in the same way we were. These are the ones outside the United States. But down there, you'll get just a feeling of how, through Mother Butler, who herself was an international woman, she went from Ireland to France. That was where she entered. That was where she did her training. Then, people often forget this, she was sent to Portugal, and for 20 years, she was in charge of a school in Portugal. So Mother Butler then finally comes and founds the first Marymount in Tarrytown. No wonder the junior year abroad and all that was started. It was a prophetic gesture back in the 1920s. That vision was deeply affected by her own internationality, her own breadth of experience and scope. Today, we still have about 17 schools connected with a network, even though we do not have a presence in all of them. But they come together and they form a new network for collaboration in support of our mission. And now we're going to pick up on Sister Jackie's personal words, and I'm going to share a little bit about our story in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, as it became, and how we moved from one world to another. That was the school, the town, and the students when I was there. It was a beautiful setting, and it was very lovely. It was also, you'll notice we're all white in that picture at that time. Gradually, we had a wonderful group of sisters, and do you recognize one of them? Just to help you. You see, I had to get back at her because she told you that I was her student. So that was probably 1963. We were trying to date it, but that's probably 1963. So that gives you a feeling. And the year after that picture was taken, the sisters moved into a very poor rural area, a mission school, opened a school at the request of the needs of responding to needs. And that was St. Kilian's Mission School, where our sisters remained for about 12 years. That is the past. We come now to the late 70s, and I had just made my final vows, and I went back to, I was asked to go back to help close Marymount, because there was a liberation struggle going on, and it was very likely we were going to be pulling out within the year. We stayed for 1 year. But then the bishops came and asked, they said, please will the religious, when our general council came to visit, they said, please help us to form the new Zimbabwe. And so we stayed. And so our ministries diversified. And just to give you a little flavor of some of the service and outreach work in the diocese, out in a mission where Sister Ann Barrow was nurse, down, starting a library. That sister who is there, Sister Tendai, as she's called in Zimbabwe, is 91 now. And gradually young women have joined us from, oh sorry, I thought I had a picture of young Rosemary. We now have some Zimbabweans and Zambians who have joined us. And so our face has changed significantly, and even our regional superior is Zambian. Zambia was the same. It was a mission school at first, but then today we are present in many different outreach works. For example, HIV/AIDS is a huge problem in sub-Saharan Africa. And so our presence in hospices, our presence in that little school for the orphans of people suffering from HIV and AIDS, and the girls and boys who have gone through that, celebrating the 50 years of the rural school where our sisters work with 760 students today, that has reached out to work with rural women as well, and especially with girls who were unable to finish their secondary education. Up on the right-hand side, written in the local language, is the name Marymount, in the local language, because the people opened a community school and they wanted to call it the Mount of Mary, and because it was the sisters who helped to get that supported. One of our young sisters there, Sister Spiwe, now teaches in that very school. Our mission statement, and I think really to understand our outreach, to understand our service in this more contemporary time, and especially because we'll be moving to the United Nations in a minute, we have to remember that in 1971, the bishops came out with that very powerful encyclical on justice. And that led us to recognize what they said, that justice is a constitutive part of preaching the gospel. And our document that same year, called Justice in the World, led us to put evangelical justice into all our works and ministries, be they educational, be they outreach. So that by 1990, we formulated that in a mission statement. And there are just a few flashes from it there. And Father Jack quoted some of that this morning at Mass. So responding to the needs of our times. Evangelical justice, giving voice to the voiceless, enabling the powerless by working for their development and liberation. And that mission statement inspires us, and I just flash through a few images from around the world. Our Brazilian province, where work with agricultural producers in the Northeast, with children who are in the favelas, with a home for children, HIV, AIDS again, to places here in the United States, a lot of ministries with immigrants, with children of immigrants, with families, Florida Legal Services, Southwest Virginia Legal Services, Sister Maria Timoney up on the left, whom some of you may have possibly met, who is a lawyer here in Virginia. So that outreach of service, also in England and Ireland, Scotland and Wales, RSHM sisters serve in a variety of ministries which seek to promote life. And here are just a few of them, working with different groups, and a few images. That says something about our outreach and service in the world today. And now I'd like to share just a little bit about how we have, since 2006, been an NGO, a non-government organization, registered at the UN. And Sister Rita, whose death we mourn greatly, was our first representative. And Sister Bridget, whom you will know as a member of your board, was the second. What we hope to do, and what we were called to do in our last chapter, was to collaborate, network, and be engaged in advocacy to work for justice in this way. And so our work at the United Nations picks up on many aspects of the UN Charter, which, I just quote a few phrases from it on the screen there, which highlights established conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and agreements promote social progress, better standards of life, and very specially reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of the human person, equal rights, men and women, and of nations large and small. So it is in that context, of course, that the United Nations was formed back in 1945. And we today, and I think what the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon says, which is very true, is that people of faith are on the front lines, on the ground. We've seen some of that in the pictures and images I showed you, to meet the needs of the world poorest and to bridge chasms of ignorance and misunderstanding. And so the decision in 2006, when Sister Rita Arthur was appointed as the first NGO representative, at that time we were just, you might say, we had a passive voice. We were attached to the Department of Public Information. And through Sister Rita's hard work, an application was made for us to be in consultative status, which we have had since 2013. And what that really does is to give us active voice within the NGO community and within the United Nations itself when civil society is able to be involved. Sister Bridget Driscoll was our second representative, and I have taken over from her since June 2013. Now, what is our ministry there? It's in collaboration, because we strongly believe that it is with others. And together with other religious congregations who are represented at the UN, we have great support, we share information and resources. We come together as what is called Run Religious at the UN, to pray, to reflect on our common responsibilities, and in view of our the lens we use in terms of our charism, history, and mission. But many of our concerns are the same. And if you think of the group that is represented there, some of the non-government organizations are made up of 16 or 17 religious congregations. Others are federations, others are individual like ourselves. But I think the bottom sentence on that slide sums up something very powerful. Together, the members of our Run have people, what a sentence, excuse me. For those of you who are English professors, you'll fail me on my next test. Same word twice. In 176 countries, and represent hundreds of thousands of religious around the world. So our presence at the UN is trying to be a voice for the voiceless, is trying to bring the voice from the grassroots into the deliberations at the UN. We also do that in collaboration with other faiths. And just 2.5 weeks ago, I had a very powerful experience of the religious NGOs at the UN. An interfaith group. Each year there is a week dedicated to Interfaith Harmony Week. And last year, 2 weeks ago, following on last year, there was a panel with people from 7 different major faiths. One of the speakers was the young woman that I've just pictured up on the right-hand side, who is the representative of the World Parliament of Religions. And she spoke very beautifully of how she was a child in 2001. And she said, on September 11th, she said, I felt after that, my faith had been hijacked. And she said, now, after these years, I am coming to see that my faith is a resource for diversity, whereby together with other faiths we can build on the ground of our common values and morals. And I have to say that has been my experience of working and being part of events with the religious NGOs of other faiths as well at the UN. We belong to many groups. You heard that, our work for women and girls, of course, has been particularly and is particularly our focus. So we work as part of NGO committees like the Working Group on Girls, where together with about 80 national and international NGOs, we are able to, for example, bring the voices from the ground. We brought experiences from Brazil, from Zambia, Zimbabwe, and California into a recent survey of information that is part of the advocacy work done by NGOs at the UN. Sometimes, such as this, there is a highlighting of particular aspects that we wish to highlight as part of the human dignity and value of girls. And this can be part of the outreach work to missions, or as they are called, or the embassies to the UN. Our work also is in the area of human trafficking. A deep concern, a passion, and a strong commitment as institute that we have. We are able to join together with other members of the committee to stop trafficking in persons, to raise awareness, ensure action at the United Nations, and also advocate for the provision of services. Migration is the same. Just very recently, as an NGO, we were able to sign together with 309 other NGOs about the violation of human rights of migrants in transit at sea, crossing the Mediterranean, for example, to come into Europe, and to call for protection of the rights of migrants. The Millennium Development Goals has been a tremendous focus of our energy, both on the ground around the world, through our Justice Network and at the United Nations. And I just give you a flavor as we approach the end of this 15-year period. There are many successes. Impressive strides have been made in access to primary education, for example, to achieve that goal. But still there are 50 million children who do not attend school, and double that number who lack basic reading and writing skills even though they do attend. Same thing with water. This more than 2 billion people, thanks to the Millennium Development Goals, have gained access to improved water sources since 1990. But there are still huge numbers, and we are deeply aware of that on the ground in Brazil, in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique. More than 2 billion people do not have access to basic sanitation. So it is civil society groups and NGOs like ourselves who try to bring some of the experience of what has not worked and some of the experience of what has worked as best practices into the work of the Economic and Social Commission and the varying groups. Pope Francis has made several strong pleas, this one in the Joy of the Gospel, about the responsibility of each individual Christian and every community to be an instrument of God for the liberation and promotion of the poor, for enabling them to be fully a part of society. And we will be beginning, there has been a tremendous amount of engagement of the religious NGOs at the UN in the area of what will be the Sustainable Development Goals, which will be starting as of the summit to be held in September, and I believe Pope Francis will actually attend that summit at the United Nations. The words that the Secretary General has highlighted are words that resonate very much with our mission as religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary. And so as we look into that post-2015 agenda, remembering our own mission statement, our commitment, I'd like to end with this quote from Pope Francis, speaking to one of the many agencies of the UN in 2014. As he looks towards the future, he speaks of future sustainable development goals must therefore be formulated and carried out with generosity and courage, so that they can have a real impact on the structural causes of poverty and hunger, attain more substantial results in protecting the environment, ensure decent work for all, and provide appropriate protection for the family, which is an essential element in sustainable human and social development. And so we are called to continue our mission, to do that with hope and creativity, even as we have smaller numbers, relying on the collaboration of all those who work with us. And for that, I am deeply grateful of this opportunity to share with you, so that all may have life. Thank you.
That was excellent. Thank you so much. You can answer some questions. Right? Let's see if we can. Sister has generously agreed to open the floor for questions, so I'll travel with the handheld mic, and Sister has another. So if anybody has any questions, you raise your hand, and I'll make my way around.
Sister, thank you so much for a wonderful speech. This is not a question, it's rather an observation. Since I've been affiliated with Marymount University and I've been learning more and more about Catholic faith, I realized that even though women are not allowed to be priests, and I'm sure that at some point that's going to happen too. But sisters are just so wonderfully involved in everything, and the service that they provide is just as important, if not more important, than the priest in the faith. That's what I think.
Thank you.
Don't be so sure. Other questions? Yes.
I'd be interested in hearing you define a little bit about life, so that all may have life. So what does that entail? What does that encapsulate?
Well, we believe that life is from the beginning to the end. It's a very broad concept. And sometimes that creates a little bit of difficulty for us. We do not believe it is limited to just before birth. When we say that all may have life, we are talking about human dignity from conception right through to natural death. I think that's how we see life. And so when we look at every one of those MDGs, and having lived for most of my life of ministry in the African context, daily I have been confronted with situations where, a child of 5, for example, who, because of poverty, has no life chances. Because her ability to respond is affected by all that is happening that is keeping her in poverty. So to address issues to do with life, I strongly believe we have to look at it in a totally holistic sense. And that is how we, I think, as RSHM, are focusing. So at the United Nations, we are concerned with HIV/AIDS, we are concerned with issues of poverty, we are deeply concerned about issues of deprivation which marginalize and affect. And we are deeply involved in the areas, especially where our sisters on the ground are most active, because we are the voice, we're there to work for them and to be so that in our mission and our presence, we can be a strong advocate for life in the broad sense of the word, incorporating all of humanity and all of creation, because for life to be sustainable on earth, we have to be concerned also, I believe, and we all believe, about the sustainability of planet Earth and the health of nature.
Thank you, sister. One of my most vivid and pleasant memories is making my way up towards the Limpopo, is it called the Limpopo River? Yes, near the Bight Bridge, and encountering the loudest pack of fellow creatures I ever had, a whole swarm of baboons around dawn in the morning, and going over the Bight Bridge, and not buying my way into a visa further into Zimbabwe, because I had no idea that the sisters were still probably, and what I'm trying to get to is, what are your current active ministries in Zimbabwe? That's been a tough area, and congratulations and God bless you for anything you've been able to do there.
Thank you. One of our is this working? Yes, it is. Okay, thank you. Some of our present ministries are still the ones that you saw in that picture. We have a presence in a very poor area of what used to be Amtali, Mutari, and we are present there pastorally. Our sister, who is 91, still brings people to the hospital in a truck that is an ambulance. She also ran and trained a librarian from among the children that you saw there. There's a little library that was opened. One of our sisters whom you saw in the top left-hand picture, Sister Evelyn Murray. Oh dear, I think I pressed the wrong. I won't try and show it to you again. Sister Evelyn Murray works for the Diocese of Mutare. She has been the coordinator of the DOMCAP, which is the diocesan program for community care. And it affects the entire diocese. The idea is to work for people suffering from HIV/AIDS, whether it's directly or indirectly, because communities have been decimated by the disease in terms of a middle generation. So she works with a large team there in terms of the improvement of life conditions and possibility for families. That's a diocesan program. We have, in another part, we have someone who's a nurse out in a very remote rural hospital. We have others who do tutoring. Some of our not quite so young sisters do tutoring and work with girls who are out of, or young men who are out of school. So those, and we've just had one of our sisters open a very simple little informal school for children who are still completely among those out of the system because of poverty and difficulty. So those are some of our ministries, as well as some retreat work has been and continues to be done.
Hello. I graduated from Marymount.
Sorry, where are you? Oh, there,
I graduated from Marymount, and then before I came back, I was a special ed teacher, and one of my first students was one of my favorites, and I still am in contact with her. Is there any personal experience that you have or a person that you carry with you?
From Zimbabwe?
Yes.
Oh, many. Oh, it's difficult to say. Let me just mention one. 4 years ago, when I was in Zambia, I was trying to do some awareness, raising awareness about trafficking. And it was the time of the World Cup in South Africa. And I was in Harare, and I was actually organizing a workshop. And I went to visit a place that was doing a lot against trafficking. And they said, oh, you must meet Farai. And Farai told me her story. And she said, I am 30. And she said, I have a son, of 15. And she told me her story, and it really boiled down to the fact that Farai was nearly trafficked 15 years before that into Mozambique. And she said, thanks to some church people, I was protected because my friend got sick, and we never went to follow this woman who promised us a job in Mozambique. And so I was protected, and I had my baby on my back. I'd never gone to prenatal care. And she said, somebody took me in and helped me, and I got educated. And now I want to help these young women on the streets of Harare who have been tricked, and they're going down to South Africa. I was so touched by her. She's just one. There are numerous Farais, but that's one to answer your question.
Sister, thank you so much for that very enlightening speech that you gave to us. I do have a question. I'm intrigued by the fact that you're of European extraction, but were raised in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. Did you feel any cultural conflict or identity confusion? And then I'm also intrigued by the fact that you chose to take on another identity, that of the RSHM. And has that helped you to sort of supersede any sense of cultural dependence, perhaps, and see yourself more as a citizen of the world? Thank you.
Now, before I answer your question, I'm going to say that the United Nations has a very good way for answering questions. Because what they do is they usually have a panel, and they usually get about 4 or 5 questions, and each one is able to think through an answer to at least one of them and then give it. And I'm missing that at the moment. your question warrants a better answer than I'll be able to give quickly. But yes, when I was growing up, I grew up in the colonial times where there was a lot of apartheid. But my parents, every Sunday, brought in one or two of the women from the local Christian community across the bridge where there was no church, some of the families, to go to Mass, and that was a 20-mile ride. So every Sunday I had the opportunity to learn something from my parents and also to learn from the women who were part of my life at a very early age. Cultural identity crisis, I don't know, I do sometimes feel like a global citizen, yes. And that is a richness and a poverty because you belong everywhere and in some way you belong nowhere. I think that there are many, joining the RSHM was a wonderful way of integrating me into a broader sense of identity and getting a perspective on the country where I had grown up and on situations that maybe I would never have come to understand in much greater depth, and to link it to my faith in a way that enabled me and made me want to go back and work to break through whatever there was of cultural misunderstanding as well as injustice. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's what I can do for the moment.
Good afternoon. Linda McMurdoch. I just would like to know, given that we are all educators here and we are attempting to carry on the traditions and the values of the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary through our work here at Marymount University, what are you looking for from us?
That is a wonderful question. Thank you. I think one needs, again, to give much thought to that answer, and I would be happy to give you a much better answer, even by email later on. But right now, something that comes to my mind is, first of all, the United Nations is not the Security Council. And I'm not saying that anyone in this room says this, but I think there is a way in which an understanding of what, like sometimes people might say, well, what is the RSHM doing at the UN? And I think we're at the UN because we know that it is much more than that. The humanitarian work, the dialogue work, the sense of presence to human situations in need of building human dignity, consolidating dialogue, etc. What we can contribute sometimes are best practices. Maybe Marymount University has some best practices. That could be one thing. I think as Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary at the UN, we have a wonderful opportunity to share those. Maybe a service program that some of your students are involved in. Maybe there is input in some of the courses that could be very helpful to shed light and depth for us and for me. Maybe there is something that through our Justice, Peace and Integrity of Creation network, with whom we are collaborating, we could actually bring what's happening on the ground into the discussions, into the groups, and where we get a chance, into the actual, feed it into the process relating to the Sustainable Development Goals. So I will think more about it, but that's just a very quick response for now through the lens of our RSHM NGO.
Thank you very much.
Sister, we want to, on behalf of the entire university, we want to thank you so much for traveling to be with us today. And I can tell you personally, if you are not more proud to be part of the Marymount community after listening to Sister, then come see me. Because we have learned so much, and the great work that you're doing personally and all the sisters do. We just thank you, and we're blessed to have you with us today. I know the sisters feel the same way to have you as part of their community. And again, we feel very much part of the family, and Dr. McMurdoch expressed our interest to help you personally with your work, and of course the sisters. And so we will do our very best to carry that on as a university. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for being with us.
You guys for one moment, and I want to thank you for being here. As you know, I'm very proud of Veronica. Now it's working. I am very proud of her, and I thank you for coming to be what the four of us, to share the gift that we know we have, not only in Veronica, but how it spreads to the whole community. We all do different things. I had to say I reacted very strongly to something you said, V, and that is, what do I do? I'm not a teacher anymore. I'm a hospice nurse, and that's the other end of life. And it's a very difficult end, and it's a part of life where people give up. So I do feel, and finally after a long time, feel that our call that they may have life is fulfilled. So I thank you for bringing that back to my attention. And I thank all of you for putting up with me, because you know I'm always around.